It looks like we are on.
Okay. Yeah, are you recording from your end?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Greetings, everybody. This is my former CO. It's the EDF, wasn't it?
We were with, well, actually, you and I both served with Knockwaffen on board the Franklin together. I was the CO of the Franklin. And I believe you and I both got introduced aboard my original ship in Knockwaffen, which was the Patton. So
And that was a command carrier, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a capital class command carrier, yeah.
I thought we served with the American branch.
Yeah, well, I mean, there were a lot of Americans and other folks on board our ship, but you know how it is on board any Knockwaffen facility or ship, right? You got people you got areas where people speak German, and then you got everyone else that speaks whatever their language is, and some areas even have translators in them.
Okay, is it because it started out, because of Knockwaffen where it started out there, is everybody calls themselves that, or is it,
I actually separate my time and the programs out by program that I was in. In other words, I started out in Kruger. I was then graduated out of Kruger into MDF. And then from MDF, I went into Knockwaffen. So in the Kruger team that I was actually on, we were doing actual missions here on Earth and off planet, both. So.
Okay. Yeah. So what was it? The Falcon, right? Is that what it's called?
Say again.
Yeah, the name of the Corvette.
Talking my ship, the ship that I was the CO of.
Yeah.
That was the Franklin, the USS Franklin. Yeah, the TJ Franklin. Yep.
And it's a USSS.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
And apparently, that's a running joke.
Yeah, you and I joked about this because it's like even within the programs, people don't want to say United Spaceship.
Yeah.
So they'll use some other nomenclature that has the same exact lettering, right? So it's kind of an internal joke among the program people. So.
Or United States Starship.
Right. Yeah, whatever it happens to be, it's like everyone just kind of goes, okay, well, we know it's a ship, we know we're on it, and we know who paid for it.
Yeah, I remember like one of the things they did with the Y&K is they had this like old Soviet ship, and I think you can correct me on this, like I guess they took their worst performing captains, and basically the idea is do your very best not to mutiny.
Correct.
So,
yeah.
And then anything you serve after that is you're not going to complain.
Y&K is a little different because they had a lot of reclaimed technology. So depending upon which particular area of Y&K you were serving under, depending on the ship you were on also and the group that you were with within Y&K, just like Knockwaffen, they may or may not have reclaimed technology. And that was the idea behind Corellia, New Earth. They were bringing that reclaimed technology back and rebuilding new ships with it.
Can you expand what you mean by reclaimed?
So, for example, they would take old metal, old engine parts, old weapons, especially old communications technology that was still usable and feasible, and they would migrate it to a new hull.
So basically cannibalize it and then repurpose it.
Yep. And if the metal could be reused, they would reuse it in whatever way they deemed necessary that could be reused. Now, I have to say this. There were certain hull types that were built that I know for a fact they could not reuse, and that metal was basically redone at the forge. They actually would completely smelt it. And the reason why I say that is because some of the old German U-boat hulls that were used for space travel, they actually showed a lot of bad external wear. So.
Yeah, because I remember, like I said, like being on one of those like old rundown Soviet ships. They use like a protein resequencing thing. So basically, when you flush it, it's supposed to recombine it into food.
Right.
It doesn't always work, which is like I did the running joke because I remember like first time a child was like, "Hey, do you want some wasabi with that?" No thanks, I'm good. Are you sure? You know, and they're like, from then I was like, pour on the wasabi. So the running joke is like, like an engineering section. It's like, how are the pulsar engines running? Smooth as a baby's bottom. How's the fuel mixture? It needs more wasabi.
Well, in the military, ironically, that's exactly the reason why I had a go bag inside my rucksack, because we did the same thing there. You get MRE, and it's like everything tasted like ketchup, Tabasco sauce, or barbecue. There was no other flavors. That's all you had.
Yeah, MREs suck no matter what planet you're on.
That's correct. Yes.
Or you just have like, I just had like a little flash of like basically having the syringe just like in the stomach. That's like, I guess like emergency protein or something like that.
Yeah. Now, I would say this. Now, for you and I, the first time you and I met, you were actually one of your alters in that particular instance.
Yeah.
And that's where, ironically, you and I started chatting was with your alter, Tanya, because as soon as you flashed a picture of her, I mean, you can ask my wife who is here. I literally had one of those moments where I was like, holy shit, what just happened? Like, I knew exactly who that was as soon as I saw the picture. I was like, okay, I know who that is. Does this person know who that is? Which is why I started asking you some very direct questions. And I was trying not to get too specific within the chat window, because I knew a lot of people were watching that chat. I was trying to see if you were the person that I thought was who that person was. So.
And to explain to the audience, Tanya was like my female clone. Literally, the only difference between me and her is our chromosomes.
Yep.
But like I said, it's like, it's like a butterfly effect. You change one little thing, everything else kind of, it's like cascade. And yeah, the especially with the quantum entanglement, because I have like 2 female clones that I'm aware of, and I have 3 other alters who are male. There's 5 that I know of. I'm sure I probably have dozens, but yeah, I remember like because like I think that when they did the cloning is like basically they grow a full adult body. Or
yes, actually, what I was going to say was in that respect. Give me 1 second here. I actually found a picture from a guy. He actually was a security officer at Achuleta Mesa, which is down in New Mexico.
Okay.
Which is part of an Indian reservation. And he actually walked off base with 2 photographs of the cloning tanks used there with actual clones in them. And he said, this is exactly how the cloning is being done. And ironically, after he released those photographs during one of the cons, his wife, and his kids went missing. They don't know if he's dead or if he actually went to hiding, because he said that he was being pursued.
He disappeared, basically.
Yeah, or someone disappeared him.
Either way. There's also like a lot of cloning when it comes to celebrities and pop singers. Like you can go on YouTube and you'll get Tell Him by the Exciters, and it's Michelle Obama in the lead, and you'll see Rihanna and Beyonce as the 2 women backup singers. I couldn't place who the guy was, but you watch that video, and 1964, there's Michelle Obama. I know something about love, but I want it bad.
So here, I actually have in some of the work I'm doing right now to flesh out my material.
Okay.
I'm actually going to screen share this really quick so you can see this. If I can.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because I don't know if this is going to let me do this or not. All right. Can you see that?
I can see that.
That is the actual cloning tanks pictures taken by the guy in question.
Whoa.
And I believe, I got his name up here. Yes, Thomas Costello is the guy's name. He worked at Archuleta Mesa. So when people tell me that we in fact do not have this technology, nor is it even physically existing yet, that tells me differently.
And soft disclosure, do you remember the cloning from the third Resident Evil movie at the end?
Yeah.
It had those sacks basically, and I see the same thing in the movie The Island. It's that same type. So it's definitely now soft disclosure. How much of that is direct disclosure, and how much is the 100th Monkey Leap?
You have to look at the technology and that's being questioned, right? So in some cases, what we have is direct soft disclosure, which we know is 100% accurate. And usually they trickle that into the movies off and on. And then they'll buffer that with some guy's idea of how it should work, which is usually the false part, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we have to, those of us that have been in the programs, we know how this technology works. We have to kind of look at that and go, okay, well, I know how this technology actually works. So, and what this guy's telling us doesn't make sense because he's never been in the programs.
And sometimes, like, for example, Star Trek is a good example of a mix of both direct soft disclosure, and then they'll mix in some, like, what we call silly tech just to throw it off, like dilithium crystals, for example.
Right.
And then later on, okay, antimatter is more plausible, except it's overkill for a warp drive engine. Hey, rocket. Hey, yeah. But like for a good example, it's like the Constellation class Enterprise is arguably one of the worst starship designs I have ever seen. And if you remember the Enterprise destruction scene in Star Trek Beyond, that's the reason why it is a shitty design.
Right.
It's like you have this thin little neck that separates the command and for some reason all the crew quarters, and that's where they house their torpedoes, and then you got the engineering section. If I was going to go against that, the first thing I would aim is for that little neck, hit all those torpedoes, and also like the way, like, well, one thing about Star Trek is they confuse the impulse engines where the warp drive is supposed to be, and the warp drive is supposed to be internal. And the only thing the warp drive does is it creates the time warp. It's the pulse engines that does the movement.
Right.
So
getting back. Sorry. I'll say getting back to your question. If you look at, for example, the group that I was calling JDFC, which is a Joint Defense Force Command, which is the overarching thing the ICC uses for all of their base defense, who the MDF answers to, who EDF answers to, even to a certain degree, Earth Alliance and Space Alliance answers to, right? They actually channel all that technology through the Earth corporations who design it and build it, and we build it out here in space.
I know, well, something like command carrier, you won't even park that within the solar system because of all the gravitational displacement.
Right.
Remember, like the Hyperion was like, you imagine like a 20-mile long flash drive with a city on top of it and a very big cannon below it.
Right. Well, and look at the patent. Look at the patent too, right? The patent was generically the same size, but imagine that being like a large Corellia, like a what they call it, the Corellia cruisers used in Star Wars, right, by the Empire.
Like a super Star Destroyer. Yeah,
but it was more like a 75-degree swept wing design, not what they have in the movie. That's right. That's a big argument I have with that design. Lockheed Martin actually designed it, and Northrop actually came up with some of the technology used in it. And the funny part is, if you look inside the shuttles, like the small, like 4 to 6 man shuttles,
yeah,
which actually I might also have another picture of here somewhere. I've been doing some digging back through some of my old pictures that I had. And this is why when people talk to me about, the particular individual in the programs or not, I can look. There's actually a ship that was designed by Lockheed Martin, and they actually built the, here it is. Okay, I'm gonna share the screen with you as well.
All right.
This is actually the, all right, can you see that?
Oh yeah.
That is actually the design that's used by Lockheed Martin. They retrieved this particular shuttle design from a crashed UFO that was in East Germany. This particular design was retrieved in May of 1989. It was reverse engineered and used by Lockheed Skunk Works and tested. And this is exactly what I saw taking me up to the moon when we were actually being taken up for indoc. We called indoctrination stuff. This is anywhere from a 2 to 4 man shuttle. They have a cargo area in the back where they can lay stuff in there, and that's where we were.
Yeah, do you that one I posted to our SSP group saying like, only terrestrial humans would build a spacecraft that looks like an RV. That almost looks like that design. I think that one I saw was that it's like a slightly bigger version of that.
Well, I mean, they have other variants of that design. And this is again where CG and I have our argument, right? So he had his computer guy generate this picture of what he called a dart, which is the shuttle design he's talking about. This actually comes directly from Lockheed Martin. So do I trust CG or Lockheed Martin, right? That's the argument.
Yeah. But weren't the Y&K fighter craft called darts as well?
They had a dart fighter. They also had one they called the Needle, which was a real thin fighter craft that was launched off of ships like the one that you were on. And they used a very specific type of engine pattern that we don't see anywhere else within the SSPs. They used a quad engine pattern, and they were very, very fast, extremely nimble, very lightweight armor, very lightweight weaponry.
Basically a space Suzuki motorcycle.
Yeah, like a space crotch rocket. Yes, yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah.
And I think one of the best design I think for like single person craft are the ones almost like the Minbari fighters from Babylon 5, where you lay forward and you can use your entire body movement to control it.
Well, and that's the exact same design actually used when they remade Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah.
That's exactly what was used by the Cylons too. If you look at the Cylon wing fighters, you laid down those and flew it around.
Yeah, and that's like I said, one of the best designs because your hands are free to control the weapons, and like aim independently, and you just use your body to control the ship.
Right. Yeah.
And remember we had a debate about the hammerhead versus sword configuration?
Yeah.
Hammerheads are usually like smaller to medium ships.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes like the weapons arrays are like aligned along the planes, and we don't call them wings or struts. They call them planes for some reason.
Well, and the hammerhead design specifically is where you would typically see your merchant marine vessels, like what the ICC uses.
Yeah.
You do see them in smaller military configurations. You see them a lot in ambassadorial ships. Where you start seeing the sword design, which is the one that you and I were chatting about.
Yeah.
That particular design is what you start seeing when you start getting into the larger classes, like the frigate, the corvettes, the capital classes, the aircraft carriers, those, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to put all of your aircraft, your weaponry, and your speed up front.
Yeah, and like I know hammerheads are ideal for asteroid belts because the X axis, is like towards the front. of the ship. So you bank and curve versus like something like a sword configuration. The X radial axis is along the back, so like you move up, and the whole ship goes.
Well, and you also well, and the thing is, you have to think about this too, right? So in any ship design, wherever you have the largest portion of your mass, your thrusters in that area of the ship have to overcompensate for the excess mass in that area to move everything in the same direction, right?
Yeah.
And that's the problem with either of those designs. The only design that doesn't have that issue is the Helenquator, which is what Corey says he's on. Now that design is a real design. I believe that was actually developed again by Lockheed Martin. That's the tubular ship that has the two toroidal ring systems on it. And that particular ship design does not have that issue because they don't use thrusters on that ship.
Those are torsion rings, aren't they? What you described? Yeah,
basically what you have is you have a mercury solution inside of a pressurized canister. It's being pressurized to 250,000 earth pressures, right? And it's being swung at about 85,000 rotations per minute. And what that does is the mercury isotope inside the motor creates an electrical discharge as it's being spun. And as it's being spun, that's where the anti-gravity and what they call the gravity dip effect actually happens. When you put more torsion on the front, it actually causes the ship to lean forward, and you get this kind of effect where it's being pulled along by gravity.
Almost like a helicopter.
Now, actually, there's actually a ship that was actually recorded here on Earth. I don't know if you saw that what's called a thimble incident that was off of the USS. Oh, what was that? The USS. I can't remember what the ship was, but they actually recorded the ship they called the Thimble, and they actually had F-15 fighter pilots and F-22s actually following it.
Oh, this is in the 1960s, wasn't it?
No, this was actually just a couple years ago.
Okay.
They were actually out in the Pacific, and this ship actually caught an intruder showing up on its radars, blipping in, and they scrambled aircraft out to go see what the hell it was. And this thing, essentially, the ship would actually turn, and out here is where the gravity dip was happening. So what you have is the tip of the ship being pulled toward gravity. And it was constantly being pulled that way, and the pilots couldn't explain how it was staying in the air. 50-foot diameter ship. They said it definitely showed up on radar. It was not a figment of their imaginations. They had weapon lock on it. And every time they tried to get weapon lock, all of a sudden the ship would move and it would jump from one place to another. And they couldn't.
That seems like a time dilation.
Or exercising a large amount of gravity pull on that object.
Yeah.
Think about this. Time within a gravity well changes relatively, right? So if you all of a sudden ramp up your gravity over here, you're pulled immediately to that spot. So it looks like an instantaneous pull, instantaneous acceleration, right?
I tell people, like, the Cochrane equation for warp drive is a very, very simple formula. Electricity is the magnetism. Magnetism is the gravity. Gravity is the time. Once you create a time dilation, then say you move faster than the speed of light. There's, literally you're creating a time warp. Hence, warp drive. Which is interesting is the original unaired pilot. They call it the time warp drive. And when they went at light speed, all of a sudden everything started turning transparent. Which once you get past the light threshold, especially if you're in time dilation, everything else looks normal. But the second you hit the light barrier, things do kind of look transparent for a second.
Hey, you can see my face now.
Does that sound correct, or?
Yeah, well, what's happening is you've got within the torsion engine, because of the amount of gravity that's being generated either on one end or the other, that's actually creating the pull effect where it's actually pulling the body toward it. Right. This is the same type of engine technology that Zeta Reticulans used when they first visited here, and we had the issue in Roswell in 1947. And that's how we actually, I believe, got that original engine idea, was from that ship. when they took it to White Pat, had it deconstructed. They looked at the engine and said, okay, how do they do this? And the engineers went, blah, and they tested it. And all of a sudden they're like, well, crap, this thing can do X, Y, and Z, you know?
Well, not only did we back engineer the Zeta technology, we improved on the design. Because you see like this old flying saucer footage, it's all wobbly and shit, because they have one anti-gravity engine. And we took the main anti-gravity engine in the center on the TRP-3, and then we put 3 more as stabilizers.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I remember like this one individual whose name I won't mention yet, but I remember the first time I approached her on the subject, like, that's impossible. They're like thousands of years ahead of us in technology. It's like, yeah, they have zero creativity. They only have, like, our brain is bifurcated. We have the right and left side. Theirs is the equivalent of a left. So, you know, they may not need computers and stuff for their engineering, but, you know, once they got the one little thing, they didn't think beyond, oh, how do we improve on it?
Right. Well, think about this too. I mean, most of the species that you and I have interfaced with,
yeah,
they design everything based on what is my need right now? What is my engineering need to get me from point A to point B? If this thing does not do that, then why am I building it? And that's the way they structure their entire society. Everything is based on what do I need right now?
Which is why, if I remember correctly, sometimes we'd have like certain ETs like, you know, hitch a ride with us for whatever reason. And they're like amazed because we have every accommodation you could think of, it's like, you know, we got recreational facilities, got exercise facilities, you know, we got, and I think your ship, some of the food processors are actually top of the line. So that's not like, you know, it's like they never think of that, you know?
Right.
Well,
the other thing too is you can also do what we can do on my ship. We could actually do live fire weapons testing. We actually had an actual firing range up to a certain class of weapon that was man portable. The second thing that we could do, we could also test out armor on board ship as well, meaning firing at armor to see what it would do. And we've done that.
And that's not something that they would ever think of doing.
No. If we actually got something from an alien technology, and let's say ICC wanted us to analyze it and send the test data back to them, we could set up a room where we actually test fire weapons at it and show them exactly what it would do and not do. That way they actually have the hardware and they also have the test data, and they can do whatever they need to do to it back. And this is exactly what I was telling you. Guys like Emery, he actually was in the ICC food chain, downwind of us. He was actually a downstream person in the ICC food chain. So for example, if you or I found a body out in the field and we killed that creature, put it in storage, guess who picked it up on Earth? That was Emery.
Okay.
When
now, I think this one, like when I was a kid, you know, I rarely ever redraw the same image, but there's one, and I realized it was Tanya, like in hindsight, and there's a trophy picture that I think she used to hang on her quarter because on some mission, some critter swallowed her and she blasted the way out. And so that's when that kind of trophy picture is like, but yeah, it's like I kept like redrawing that image like over and over until I made that connection. But do you remember I was telling you about Twilight?
Yes.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I realized in hindsight, because he was like one of my best friends in the here and now, and then I realized, oh shit, we served together in the SSP. And I'm looking in hindsight, how many people did I serve that I actually like, you know, meet up with in the HNN? And usually you have this thing where it's like, I just met you, but it felt like I've known you for like 20 years.
Well, and look at what happened with you and I, right?
Yeah.
The very first time you and I started talking, you were like, my mom and I, we used to sell pizzas outside the gate at Camp Pendleton. Well, the incident that actually happened at, I was actually on base when that actually happened, when I was getting out. So that was in like 94, I think.
Yeah, I was in high school.
So, yeah, so it was like, as soon as you said that, I'm like, okay, that can't be a coincidence, because I don't believe in coincidences. So what's up with that? Because I remember when we got talked to about that whole incident, because, well, 1st Marine Division, I was hanging out with some of my friends at the barracks when that actually happened, and you guys were bringing the pieces in and selling them to the barracks guys.
Yeah.
So it's like one of those things where it's like you can't make that kind of stuff up. It's like, okay, so obviously you and I ran into each other in the programs, and we've also ran into each other before right now.
Yeah.
So what's up with that?
And we met up again on Facebook.
Right. Ironically, yes.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where I do believe in quantum entanglement, and I believe that's what we're actually talking about here.
Yeah.
Where you have certain people who intrinsically are drawn to each other because they have stuff to work out. Right. It's like I know by getting the information that I did on Tanya, I think that helped create a certain level of closure for you, right?
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, the quantum entanglement. I mean, that really derailed where my life was at the time. Because like I remember like, well, I was telling you like I was in Job Corps in the mid '90s, and it happened to be right next to a Navy base. And because most of us are hybrids and stuff. Like the Draco DNA all of a sudden started getting really active and started causing problems. And at some point, that's when Tanya started becoming more dominant, like the quantum entanglement. And it's almost like I can't let this the Draco DNA destroy my source code's life, But like, yeah, it was like I think in '97 is when like the rubber band snapped because of what happened to Tanya in the SSP, and it's interesting. It's like the other one, and Raven is a different story because she escaped Dark Fleet somehow, and because she's been psionically augmented to the nth degree, like. Part of her came to me. You can just imagine, like, holding on to me with one hand and holding on to Tanya with the other. It's like, no, I'm keeping you two from, And that was only like, and then like, Tanya came back. She started cycling through all her undercover IDs, like right with like once a week or something. She was like a new persona.
Well, and that's about the same time for me that I started doing my work. So, 95. I'm now out of the military. I'm working through my PTSD and trauma stuff with a counselor. By 97, I'm out of that. Went through a year and a half of counseling. I think she blew at least 2 of the memory caps that contained all those memories. They all came up during post-hypnotic regression. So here I am walking out in the street, and she handed me this whole stack of notes, which I didn't even look at until probably 4 years ago. Has all this stuff in it. And that's what I'm translating now. So I'm getting all this stuff into digital format.
You went to like a license, you went under like a hypnotic regression.
Yeah, she's a licensed counselor and hypnotist, yeah.
I found a dentist who uses hypnosis instead of anesthesia on his patients. And, like memory recall wasn't his forte. So you put him in there and all he says, you'll remember everything. And, I've gone to dentists before and, it didn't take, but I wasn't expecting much to happen. And the first thing when I walked out of the office that popped in my head is there's an incident on the Hyperion. And I remember the name of the Horizon. And it was a command carrier. That was like the first thing that popped in my head. And it was just like a constant drip, drip, drip.
Well, I knew with my first recall, when I was talking to Connie, the lady who's doing the regression, I knew something was going on because when I woke up, I had stressed out myself so bad that I dug my fingernails into the palms of my hands, and I had blood coming down my hands into the floor underneath my hands. And this is during a regression session, right? To the point that it freaked her out bad enough that she actually stopped the regression session and brought me back up. And she had taken all these notes, and she's sitting there, and literally, like on the right-hand side of her notes, you would see this area where it would say, this is a past life issue. This is current life issue with dad, sister, mom, uncle, aunt, whoever. And then she had a third group that was WTF ? All of that stuff was program-related material.
Yeah.
And she couldn't, that was over half the material. Okay, that particular third group. Because every time she would call up something, she'd show me where the source of this PTSD or stress is. And all of a sudden, these recalls would start showing up, big and loud. And she didn't know what to do with that.
Could you do me a favor, like turn your video on and off real quick? It just froze. At least on my end, it looked like it froze. All right, never mind.
Okay.
Okay.
I was going to say that in that particular instance, that third group was well over half of those PHR sessions, and we were doing 2 a week for a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking an inordinate amount of time was focused around that center of my brain. So for me, when that stuff started coming up, she was documenting all of it. And she never ever once told me that any of that stuff was bad or any of that stuff was abnormal. She has said, I don't know what to do with that.
Hmm.
So that for me was the start of all this.
The very first cognitive memory that I have from this life were 3 Asian men wearing surgical masks, and this room was just like all the walls were like lit like fluorescent white, and I was like strapped down on some sort of table, and one of them shined what looked like a red laser in my right eye, and then there's like a quantum leap style zap, and next thing I knew, I was 3 years old, outside in mid-stride with my mom calling for me. Now, maybe later that night, there's like this massive thunderstorm, and what scared the shit out of me is like the visual reference I kept getting were these large arrowhead-shaped things flying, in the crisscross formation, and it, like almost right before a lightning bolt was striking, I could almost visually see like a power build up, and then and there are a bunch of smaller little black arrowheads hitting like more precise targets, and I kept seeing like ruins of cities just inflamed. Now, that's not something a 3-year-old usually thinks about when there's a thunderstorm.
Right.
And now you're telling me about the incident where you dug in so hard that you're bleeding was about giving the orders to bomb the planet.
Yes. That was the first time that I actually remember the guy that I call the old man. He was the guy who eventually took over Nakwafen at one point. The guy had, at the time, he had salt and pepper hair, salt and pepper beard, and Van Dyke. He loved cigars. He loved Earth cigars. And he had a pretty gruff voice, and he had this thing going down this side of his face where he had 3 claw marks underneath the right eye down to the middle of his cheek. And he was my CO on the patent for a long time. What I understand was that he eventually killed the guy who was in charge of Nakwafen and took over. But at this point in time, I was actually working. This is the very first mission that I was given command of as his XO. And I was actually given the con. I remember looking at the comm officer. I could see all the cameras and all the video and audio feeds, and I could hear people talking. And I remember looking at that stuff going, okay, I know for a fact if I give this order, all these people are going to die. And I kept hearing this guy barking at me behind me in German. And when I actually did the recall with Connie, I was actually speaking to her in German. Understand, I have never, ever been taught German in my life. Okay. So I'm speaking to her in German. This guy behind me is yelling me, you need to give the order now. And I remember I finally caved in and I gave the order. And that's when I saw this swarm of missiles going off the patent at the surface. I'm starting to see these nuclear blast effects underneath the actual atmosphere of the planet. And I'm talking to the MIO, and I said, give me confirmation that there's no life left on the planet, and we're going to drop troops back on the planet again. The troops that went down the second time, their job was to wipe up anything that was still left living, as our purge protocol stated, human or not.
Well, what would have been the purpose to basically, wiping out all the life on that planet? Or, I mean,
in that particular instance, we had a base on the planet. That base had been overrun with another alien species. We could not get security containment inside the base. Our purge protocols directly state if you cannot contain the base, the materials within the base, and the personnel in that base, and you cannot verify that the people in that base are in fact secure and they're not contaminated, they have to go.
That makes sense. Well, now which ET race was that?
That was actually my first run-in with the Matra, actually.
With the who?
The Matra.
Matra.
Spelled M-A-I-T-R-E. They fight the Calypsi Ray. The Calypsi Ray are actually, they actually work with us. The Matra are about 4.5 to 5 feet tall, very slender, very large heads. They look similar to Zeta Reticulans, except they have a more of a squarish chin, whereas the Zeta Reticulans have a very pointy, angular chin.
Yeah.
And they have the large eyes, the same way the Zetas do. Highly intelligent, very high IQ, but they also carry a high degree of animosity for us because we are considered competition genetically for them in the universe, and they don't like it.
They only have like the left side of their brain too, right? Or is that?
Well, technically, they have 4 hemispheres, but all 4 of their hemispheres work the same way our left hemisphere does in terms of processing numbers, facts, information. If that makes sense.
Not like the Valcash. They're
Valcash that's a whole other species. So Valcash, yeah, they're like you're my size. They can be up to 6-7 feet tall max. Like their leaders are in that height range. Very heavy. So when you look at their skin, which is very, very thick, it's almost like an armor. They can weigh upwards of 700-800 pounds, and they're essentially biological killing machines. Their whole species.
What's their reproduction cycle? Do you know?
Very fast. They're actually hatched. They're actually grown and hatched, and essentially the way I was told their society works is that from the time they're very young, it's very much like Sparta in their society. They only accept the strong into their actual warrior caste. And in order for you to be anybody in the warrior caste, it's determined by how many people you kill and how many species you're willing to kill.
Yeah, because doesn't it either grow out of like a pustule or something out of the side or something like that? No,
it actually looks like they grow these spheres on the ground that's attached to their growing equipment.
Okay.
That provides the actual the artificial womb for that creature to grow in. So there is no maternal attachment to the creature. There's no emotional attachment to the creature. And essentially they're trained and they're brought in, and depending upon how well they survive determines where they fit in their caste system.
There's some creatures that they reproduce where the young grow inside the parent and they burst out, killing the parent.
I've heard of those. I've heard some creatures that do that, but I'm trying to remember what the name right off the top of my head, and the name's not clicking for some reason. And
Well,
there are creatures too that do what they call they are creatures that they do what's called axial symmetric they clone, where essentially the actual creature goes into mitosis, and they actually will split away from the parent. I've seen those too. So depending upon the species and what that species does.
Kind of like good ass versus bad ass from the Evil Dead 2, or from Army of Darkness.
Yeah,
First thing you see is the eyeball shoulder, there's two heads, and
yeah.
Which, well, the problem you get with that is like eventually you might get some like replicate failing because it's like naturally occurring cloning. You know, like.
This is also why we see the hybridization that's going on with these other species and our species. There are members of some of these species, like the Zeta reticulans, that they want to have control of being able to breed their society again.
Well, also, like, I guess one of the reasons they like, we're our DNA is compatible with about anybody, which is part of the reason why, like our genetics are worth a lot compared to a lot of the ET races. The hybridization works both ways because, how many people would receive ET gene therapy in a flu shot? It may not affect them, but it will affect their offspring.
Correct.
And nobody would be the wiser. And that's why I'm wondering about the coronavirus, because what's going to happen? Everybody, get your vaccine, get your flu, get your coronavirus shot. Probably has ET gene therapy in it.
So think about this, right? So if we look at us as a species, one of the reasons why we are a slave species to other species, and why we sell slaves to these other species, we are highly adaptable. We're able to breed pretty quickly compared to other species. The Draco have a very slow breeding cycle compared to us, but they have extremely hardy offspring. So for them, it's not necessarily dependent on numbers, whereas they build much bigger, stronger offspring. You look at us like the Zeta reticulans. Now they clone all of their offspring, and for the Zeta reticulans, their job specifically is to figure out how to create more and more of them so we have a larger hive. The only derivation they make there is who's a handler and who's not. Because they do have some that show up.
It's interesting you mentioned the Zeta reticulans, or talk about how like they don't have any creativity. Do you remember when we talk about the Dulce base? The tall grays, yeah, their particle beam weapons are very nasty, except they mount them on their chest. It's like, yeah, it's like, we take cover, they can't, hide behind a rock. Like the first thing we learned from the earliest days of bows and arrows is take cover. And it's interesting, like that would never cross their mind.
Yeah, and that's, for us, that's something that we normally, we as a species handle that very differently, because we're all about self-preservation, whereas in their mind, in the Zeta reticulan's mind, they're all about making sure the hive survives. We'll sacrifice a couple hundred of our clones, our drones, our gray type ones, to make sure that the whole entire hive and the command structure survives, if that's what we have to do. Whereas we look at other humans and we go, these other humans are of value to us, we just want to kill them.
Hey, can you say that again? Sorry.
No, I was just saying that if you look at the way we look at other humans, we look at other humans as being of value. So we want to save those humans as much as possible. you know, during my time in the programs, I was always against slavery, even though my command structure was for it. Even though people in my command structure were for it, I was definitely against it.
Okay.
It's one of the things that I always bucked in the programs was the idea of human slavery, because that's something I just did not agree with.
Now, do we enslave, like, because someone's galactic humans would be a lot easier to, like, basically capture by itself than, like, Earth humans, because we resist that shit.
The protocols that I can remember, the idea is that we actually would either kill or capture a pair of a particular species. We would put them into cold storage, and then we let ICC determine what they wanted to do with that sample. That was their job to make that determination. Our job was just to do the kill or capture.
Right.
The issues that typically showed up there was if you had someone who captured a creature and they released it in the lab, all of a sudden they got a problem.
And now, because like humans are actually one of the more common nomenclatures out there. Like,
yes.
And like one of the things is, I guess as a nomenclature, we tend to be rather prolific breeders.
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying. That's what I was saying earlier.
I'm getting the internet quality problems right now.
Yeah, I was going to say that's one of the reasons why, as humans, we typically are faster breeders than most other species, and that's why we were looked at as being a problem once we got spaceborne in the programs. Because as soon as they saw the fact that we were very quick breeders, that we actually had technology that we could make that would actually defend us, all of a sudden certain species immediately identified us as being a problem.
Well, not only that, it's because we can take most of our stuff and back engineer it.
Correct.
You know, it's like a lot of times, like they have trouble like back engineering our shit because it's based on, you know, one of the things is like, you know, they're not creative or artistic in the least bit, and you know, you might like maybe put something on the hole for like a decorative purpose, and they go insane trying to figure out what's the reason for this.
Right.
It makes no sense. It's not logical. Which is how, like, one of the ways we used to sniff some of them out was kind of like something similar to like a Voight comp test from Blade Runner, and it's like, you know, finish a sentence. Mary had a little lamb crossing the Mississippi Delta, and then there's like, now most of us know it's like, you know, we say Mary had a little lamb, you cross it with crossing the Mississippi Delta. You know, there's no logic or reason for it. Or Jack and Jill went up the hill to smoke. Jack and Jill went up Capitol Hill to give Jill a poison pill. And like, we know it's like finish the sentence, right? But ET tries to figure out the logic behind it, and all of a sudden they're like, ah! And it's like one of those ways. It's like one of the things. Actually, I think it's a lot closer. If you remember the new one, Blade Runner 2049, where they had that kind of something similar to like a wood contest. That's what that reminds me of going through that. I confirm that you're one of us.
Right. The other thing too that I'm thinking of when you were saying that was I remember an incident where we had actually a lot of our pilots would write their names, or they would write like a name for their shuttle or their ship that they used on the side of the door where the pilot door was, on the outside, along the window maybe. And I remember we actually were transporting some individuals from a particular species, and they saw that and they could not understand why that was there. And they almost had a meltdown trying to figure out why this person would write their name on the outside of a ship and why they gave this other like code name for the ship. Like the one shuttle I remember, his name's Baby Blue for whatever reason. They called that shuttle Baby Blue, and it was an assault shuttle that could do like inter-atmosphere insertions. And these two aliens just could not figure out why they wrote Baby Blue on the outside of the ship, and they just freaked the hell out.
Yeah, I remember at a different altar. How would you describe like government sanctioned piracy? There's a name for that. Government sanctioned piracy.
Oh well, we call that reclamations.
Reclamation. Okay. Yeah, there's a private contractor type thing.
Yeah, ICC would send mercenaries to do that.
Yeah, the El Chapo. I remember flying that ship, and that's when I did the. I used to run into, they call them Ravens, the TRB-3 drones, and I used to like asteroid belt, like best way to get rid of the hitchhiker maneuver, which is basically where you throw the power to your aft gravitic plating, and that draws the whole bunch of asteroids to your aft. And one thing it does is it absorbs the enemy fire up to a point, but then you do like an L curve, like a double L curve, right? Yeah, especially you could aim right at the command ship and then release the gravitic plating, and all of a sudden you just pelted them with a whole shit ton of asteroids.
Yeah.
Or fire a sonic pulse in the middle of an asteroid belt if you time it right. Use like, well, we don't call them tractor beams. What do we call them? But like basically grab a rock, sling it into another rock, and you got chain reaction going.
We actually used mines to do that too.
Yeah, that'll work.
Launch a mine into an asteroid field, just watch the chain reaction happen as it chases the ship into the asteroid field. You start seeing this chain reaction of asteroids breaking apart and the ship getting torn apart by the asteroids.
That's called a belt wave, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd fire off like a repetition of missiles, and it'd hit further and further in. But what's happening is you're seeing this ripple wave happen through the asteroid belt, and the ship eventually gets torn up by the asteroids and the missiles or the mines.
Yeah, and it's amazing. Like with some of the ETs, they all fall for the same trick. It's pretty easy to piss them off in the trap.
Yeah, it looks like we're having technical difficulties again.
All right, you want to stop the recording for now?
Yeah, it looks like we're probably getting close time-wise.